Crown in. Got the chair.
It's right there.
It's right there. All right, good morning. My name is Ben Glassman. I'm the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio. Joining me at the podium here this morning are Herb Stapleton, the acting special agent in charge of the FBI Cincinnati Division, Robert Brown, the special agent in charge of the FBI Louisville Division, Hamilton County Coroner Lakshmi Samarko, Cincinnati Police Chief Elliot Isaac, Hamilton County Sheriff Jim Neal, and Newport Police Chief Tom Collins. And we are here this morning to announce a federal criminal charge against Brian Michael Riney. As has been widely reported over the last few days, a couple days ago, Newport, Kentucky police encountered a youngish male walking on the streets, seemingly confused. When they encountered him, he identified himself to them as Timmothy Pitzen and said that he had been abducted when he was 6 years old and had just broken free of his captors. Law enforcement responded to this situation exactly as you would hope they would. Newport police got in contact with FBI Louisville, and FBI Louisville also got in contact with FBI Cincinnati, as well as with local law enforcement in multiple states, to include Illinois, where Pitzen had gone missing from in 2011. What I'm going to tell you next, the additional information that I'm going to provide, comes from allegations in the affidavit in support of the federal criminal complaint that was sworn out and filed about an hour or so ago here in federal court in Cincinnati. And so when I mention facts as alleged in the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, please keep in mind that they are simply allegations. And Mr. Riney, like any criminal defendant, is entitled to the presumption of innocence unless and until he's proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in court. So those additional details are that while all of this law enforcement coordination was going on, the person who identified himself as Timmothy Pitzen complained of abdominal pain. And given the physical complaint as well as the obvious trauma that one would expect if, in fact, one was a child who had been missing and abducted for many years, the individual was taken to Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Meanwhile, the FBI and local law enforcement in multiple states immediately initiated a missing children investigation and a interstate sex trafficking investigation based off of what this individual had told law enforcement. When he was at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, however, the person who had identified himself as Timmothy Pitzen declined to provide fingerprints on request. He did, however, provide a swab from which DNA could be tested. I should say when the people to whom he was speaking here were the FBI task force here in Cincinnati. It was cooperative. It's the same task force that investigates sex trafficking and child sex trafficking routinely, and so it's a cooperative venture that is led by the FBI, but also includes task force officers who are assigned from Hamilton County Sheriffs and Cincinnati Police. In fact, in this case, the task force officer who spoke with this individual on Wednesday was a task force officer working with the FBI from Cincinnati Police. She identified herself to this individual and identified herself as working with the FBI. And at that time, the individual identified himself to her as Timmothy Pitzen and gave details about how he had been abducted and had been suffering from physical and sexual abuse, and had only just recently escaped from a location in Cincinnati. Meanwhile, the DNA test that was the buccal swab that had been extracted from him was submitted from the FBI to the Hamilton County Coroner's Office, which was able to turn around a quick analysis of that swab and comparison of that DNA to the DNA of Timothy Pitzen's parents indicated that the person in question was not, in fact, Timothy Pitzen. So then yesterday, FBI agents returned to talk again to the individual claiming to be Timothy Pitzen. They identified themselves to him as FBI agent. They administered Miranda warnings. They warned him that lying to a federal agent is a violation of federal law. Nevertheless, he again repeated that he was Timothy Pitzen and had escaped from a hotel where he had been held captive. Then law enforcement confronted him with the DNA results, and at that point, the person immediately stated that he was not Timothy Pitzen, and of course, law enforcement knew by virtue of the DNA analysis that he was, in fact, Brian Reaney. Further investigation by law enforcement indicated that Reaney had actually, on 2 prior occasions, claimed to be a victim of juvenile sex trafficking, and that on those occasions he had been discovered, his true identity had been discovered when he had been fingerprinted. Based on all of that information, the United States has proceeded to file a federal criminal charge against Brian Reaney for lying to a federal agent within the jurisdiction of the United States. The crime in this case is punishable by up to 8 years in federal prison because it does involve lying with respect to a material matter about an investigation that involves sex trafficking of children. I want to say that first, that on behalf of the United States, my heart goes out to the family of Timothy Pitzen. I can only imagine the kind of pain that they have been through and that this episode has caused for them. I want to commend all of the law enforcement agencies that you see standing before you here today. It's the kind of cooperative effort that is what we would hope for from law enforcement when they are confronted with this kind of situation. And of course, I also want to commend Assistant United States Attorneys Christy Muncy and Kyle Healy, who are prosecuting the case. Mr. Reaney appeared in federal court on this charge about 45 minutes ago. At the United States request, he was held without bond at the current time, and he will have a detention hearing on Tuesday. So I'm going to yield the podium momentarily to Acting Special Agent in Charge Stapleton, and then to Special Agent in Charge Brown and Hamilton County Coroner Simarco. After they've had an opportunity to make comments, I will return and answer any questions you have. The only additional point that I want to make before yielding the podium is that the investigation with respect to Mr. Reaney remains open and ongoing. So if anyone who is watching has additional information with respect to his information about him or his immediate whereabouts prior to being encountered by the Newport police, ask them to contact FBI Cincinnati in order to further that investigation. And then, as you will of course hear from my colleagues in law enforcement, and perhaps more importantly, the investigation regarding Timothy Pitzen is of course ongoing, and law enforcement will continue to do everything in their power in an effort to find the actual child. With that, I will yield the podium to Mr. Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Glassman. And I want to just start off by saying thank you very much to Mr. Glassman and his office for recognizing the seriousness of this incident. Pardon me, for recognizing the seriousness of this incident and charging it accordingly. And I also want to say, just on a personal note, and echo Mr. Glassman's sentiments, that as an employee of the FBI, as an FBI special agent, as a representative of the United States government, and as a father, my heart goes out to the family of the victim Timothy Pitzen of this terrible kidnapping and any additional pain that this incident may have caused them. On Wednesday, April 3rd, 2019, Newport, Kentucky police responded to a report of a male acting suspiciously. This individual, as Mr. Glassman said, allegedly claimed to be Timothy Pitzen, who had been missing since 2011 from Aurora, Illinois. And he also made statements about being abducted and trafficked and sex trafficked, a victim of sex trafficking. The individual was taken to a local hospital for treatment, including and an interview with a forensic psychologist, and for confirmation of his identity. While our agents and other law enforcement partners were skeptical that this person was who he claimed to be, we felt that it was our duty to the victims and the family of Timothy Pitzen to follow up all logical leads with respect to this case and do our best to confirm or discount the identity of the person claiming to be Timothy Pitzen. After scientific testing to determine if the identity of the individual matched the DNA from Timothy Pitzen, the results determined it was not the same person. And a further search of the DNA database revealed that the individual encountered in Newport was actually Brian Reaney, an adult from Medina, Ohio. Clearly, false reports like this one can be painful to the families of missing children, and they also divert valuable law enforcement resources in order to investigate untruthful claims. Law enforcement takes dishonest reports very seriously, and as these charges today show, so does the United States Attorney's Office. And we caution that people making false claims can and will face criminal penalties for their false claims. The result of Mr. Reaney's alleged false statements to law enforcement was the impetus for this charge that U.S. Attorney Glassman just announced. He's been taken into the custody of the FBI and had his initial appearance in the United States District Court. Finally, I just want to close by commending and thanking our partners for the valuable cooperation that was provided on this case. I want to thank the Newport Police Department, the Hamilton County Coroner's Office, the Aurora, Illinois Police Department, as well as task force officers from the Cincinnati Police Department, the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, the Colerain Police Department, and Homeland Security Investigations, in addition to the hard work of our agent task force officers from both the Louisville FBI office and the Cincinnati FBI office. We also greatly appreciate and support the support and cooperation of Cincinnati Children's Hospital and other partners who have assisted in this matter. At this time, I'll turn the podium over to SAC Robert Brown from the Louisville Division of the FBI.
Thanks, Herb. Thank you for coming. My name is Robert Brown. I'm the special agent in charge at the FBI's Louisville field office, which covers the Commonwealth of Kentucky. We want to thank all of our partners who rallied together for this investigation, the FBI in Kentucky and Cincinnati, the Aurora Police Department, the Newport Police Department, the Cincinnati Police Department, the Hamilton County Sheriff's Office, the Hamilton County Coroner, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and the Northern Kentucky's Children's Advocacy Center, but especially the swift work of United States Attorney for the Southern District of Ohio, Benjamin Glassman, and his hardworking AUSAs. While this is not the results we had hoped for, the outpouring of victim law enforcement and community support gives everyone hope that we'll find Timothy. The Aurora Police and the FBI did not release Timothy's name due to the initial concerns about the credibility of Reaney's story. We held out hope that it was Timothy. And it was not until the DNA results came in that we felt compelled to reveal Reaney's deception. I estimate that over 50 law enforcement officers and public health officials were used in this instance. As you saw, the FBI takes reports regarding missing children very seriously. We are dedicated to finding the lost and reuniting them with their families. As a result of false reporting in cases such as Timothy's, it is extremely traumatic to the families of the missing children and diverts resources away from the legitimate investigative efforts. Today's charge is a reminder that lying to the FBI has consequences, and we will hold those who attempt to distract us from our important work accountable. The investigation into Reaney's activities continues. The FBI asks anyone who has information related to Mr. Reaney's activities over the last few months to please contact our National Threat Operations Center at 1-800-CALL-FBI. I want to assure everyone that law enforcement is committed to finding the missing and reuniting them with their families despite the obstacles placed in front of us. Lastly, all of our thoughts are with the Pitzen family and all victims of missing children. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Want to give you a little brief timeline of what happened with us. We were asked to analyze the biological material, the DNA buccal swab, Wednesday afternoon. And Tracy Sundermeyer, who's one of our experienced DNA analysts in our office, basically dropped everything and volunteered to do the analysis. And she extracted the DNA, came up with a profile, and we reached out to our partners at BCI. We were having a little connection problem with CODIS, and we had BCI put the information in, and then we did get the confirmation yesterday afternoon that this was not a match. And you know, a lot of times we talk about what's a match and what isn't a match, and it's usually in the range of 1 trillion to 1. And considering there's only 7 billion people in the world, that's a pretty good possibility. So we have amazing partnerships with local and federal law enforcement in this region, and we're always there to help. And this just emphasizes how important it is to have these relationships and a facility that can actually process things on a dime and be able to be helpful. And lastly, I wanted to say there is no greater win for law enforcement than to be able to find a missing child and return that child to their family. And I mean, you can imagine how horrible. I can't actually imagine how horrible it is for that family. But
Pain for the family of that missing child. And I hope that's what this prosecution reflects. Any questions you have? Yes, you were first.
Can you speak to the fact of where he got this information about Timothy Pitzen to describe it so in depth?
Yeah, so according to the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint, Mr. Rini told agents that he learned this information from watching a 2020 episode about Timothy Pitzen. We confirmed that there was such a 2020 episode and that, in fact, a rerun had aired just several weeks ago. Yes.
Adriana Diaz with CBS News. While the DNA was being processed, Timothy Pitzen's family spoke publicly, and they seemed very optimistic. Were they warned at any point that the suspect was 23 years old, looked like an adult male?
I mean, this happened, the Newport police first encountered this individual who turned out to be Rini on Wednesday. And that was when the buccal swab was taken. And then the Hamilton County coroner was able to turn it around immediately. So we didn't know until you had the DNA match that this individual was in fact Brian Rini. They didn't, that was not what he was telling law enforcement, and there was no basis to identify him prior to getting that information back.
But your colleague with the FBI said that there were concerns from the start, and local police from Newport spoke to the individual, questioned the individual in person, and he looked older than 14.
Yeah, it's obviously always hard to say. What I can say is that as I mentioned before, the FBI divisions were working together with not only local law enforcement here, but with law enforcement in Aurora, Illinois, which is the agency that has led the investigation into the disappearance of Timothy Pitzen since 2011. And so there was actually an officer from Aurora who came down here to work on the matter. But obviously, given the sensitivity of the situation, and I think this is reflected by the public and private statements that have been made, the FBI and its local law enforcement partners were moving with all possible speed, but in order to do our very best not to put out any false information.
Excuse me.
Yes.
You sent a 23-year-old man to a children's hospital. At what point in the process did your officers become suspicious of his story?
I think there were suspicions relatively quickly, if for no other reason than he declined to be fingerprinted. Nevertheless, one can imagine that if you were actually a child who had been abducted since 2011 and subjected to who knows what, if those allegations were true, who knows what kind of condition that person would be in. And so it's incumbent on law enforcement in doing the investigation, this one or any others, to make sure that if this person does turn out to be the victim, you're getting them the care that they need. That is always something that law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels are very concerned with. And so obviously they're working with amazing speed to try to figure out what is going on while simultaneously ensuring that under any circumstances a victim is receiving appropriate care.
Can you talk about a little bit more about the other people, that the past instances of impersonation by Rini, and a little bit about his history of run-ins with the law?
So I can't talk that much more about it. The affidavit in support of the criminal complaint does say that he had on 2 previous occasions identified himself as, or claimed to be, a victim of child sex trafficking. I'm comfortable saying that those were claims made to law enforcement in the northern part of Ohio. Beyond that, I don't want to elaborate because it's outside the scope of what is in the affidavit in support of the criminal complaint. And I also don't want to speak to his criminal history, besides saying that it's reported in the affidavit in support of the complaint that he was recently released from custody in, I believe, March. Beyond that, I don't want to speak to his criminal history because, as a rule, in my position prosecuting the case, we don't talk about the criminal history of a defendant unless it's relevant to the specific charge, because we don't want to prejudice their right to a fair trial. So beyond that, I'll leave it up to your reporting. Yes, Todd.
With regard to refusing the fingerprints, can you describe that timeline for us a little bit, and what would that have said to investigators? Because that certainly seems like it would have been a bit of a red flag.
Yeah, I mean, I think that declining to be fingerprinted certainly is a red flag. On the other hand, as is stated in the affidavit, he did submit to a buccal swab for a DNA test. So certainly, as my colleagues from the FBI mentioned, they had suspicions, but moving with all possible speed and in coordination, both here and in Kentucky and in Illinois, wanted to make sure that there was no opportunity missed to actually find Timothy Pitzen if that opportunity had presented itself.
There's a lot of head scratching going on around the country.
Let's see, first back there and then...
Head scratching going on around the country about how this tale grew into all of this. At what point along the contact did you ask for fingerprints? And are 14-year-olds commonly asked for fingerprints, or victims commonly asked for their fingerprints?
Would you like to take that, Herb?
Sure. So every case is a little different, but it wouldn't be unusual to take whatever steps we could within the respecting the rights of a patient or a juvenile to try to identify that person and return them back to their reunite them with their families. And so what we were trying to do at that point is get a solid identification, because we deal in facts, not any kind of speculation or hunches. It was very important for us to try to establish a firm factual basis for the identity of this individual. So fingerprinting is a relatively non-invasive process, and that we'd find that to be an excellent way to make an identification of a potential juvenile victim.
Special Agent
14-year-olds
Stapleton,
have
so
fingerprints on
could you
file.
tell me if anyone specifically from the FBI reached out personally to Timothy Pitzen's father? Did you have a conversation with him yesterday? I assume he was very emotional and wanted to probably come out and be with what he thought was his son. Did you guys talk to him in person at all? And what did you say?
I did not talk to him in person. What I can tell you is that law enforcement was in contact with Timothy Pitzen's family members, and I can't say any more beyond that.
Can you describe what the conversation, how it was characterized, how it was characterized to the family in terms of?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer.
I have a question about the DNA. Can you clarify the DNA sample that you used of Timothy Pitzen and how that was then used as part of this DNA test to confirm that Rini was not Pitzen?
Yeah, sure.
Because, I mean, if the boy's been missing specifically, let me clarify, if the boy's been missing for nearly 8 years, how did you use a DNA sample from the boy to try to match to this man?
So what we try to do in a case, this is called a known sample. So what we're trying to do in this case is match an unknown sample with a known sample that we already had. And if it's a match, it can be pretty quickly done. If it's an unknown sample and we have to put that information into CODIS, into the FBI system, then we have to wait for that information to come back because it'll be checked against everybody in the database.
But I mean, in terms of Timothy Pitzen, I know that there was
a known sample.
blood that was discovered in a vehicle. Was that where the sample came from? How did you have Timothy Pitzen's DNA?
There was a known sample provided, and it was in the system, in the CODIS system. And there's also NamUs. I know you're familiar with NamUs, which is the National Association of Missing and Unidentified Persons. Basically, that system has a lot of this information in it, not necessarily the DNA sample, but all the rest of the information. But it's a comparison of a known sample to an unknown sample.
So it wasn't his
Forgive me,
parents?
where did that known sample come from?
That I don't know because we
So
were
it was
just
his parents' DNA.
That's
He had his profile in the system. His
Correct.
profile was already in the system.
Correct.
because
His
he
profile was in the
filed,
system.
and you
Yes.
obtained
Go
that
ahead.
somewhere back in 2011.
Yeah, no, so as the affidavit in support of the complaint says, compared to a sample from his parents.
Mr. Glassman, two quick procedural questions. Why in this district and not in the Eastern District of Kentucky? And also, where is Rini right now?
So the answer to the first question is that the false statement to the federal agents was made here in the Southern District of Ohio. The second question as to where he is, I would assume he's currently in the custody of the United States Marshal. He was in court at 11 a.m.
We're going to take one more question.
A question for Chief Collins.
Oh, hold on. I'm sorry. Get the question in the back. Yeah.
You mentioned that when Rini was found, he was disoriented, confused. Can you just speak as to, had something happened to him prior to that, or do you all think that he was like just planning this all along? And can you explain to me that?
I cannot explain that except to say that this investigation does remain ongoing. And so as both of the special agent in charge from the FBI said, if people do have information with respect to Rini's whereabouts or activities immediately leading up to the events that have been discussed today, we ask that they contact the FBI.
Can you speak at all to
I-
his mental state?
Thank you.